Before you decide I'm crazy, let me explain why I'm even telling you. Before you decide what this is, before you label it, reject it, or feel pulled towards it, you need to understand something first. I am not presenting a theory, I am fulfilling a contract. Not one I chose in this lifetime, but one that was assigned long before I was born. And if you're going to understand anything I'm about to say, you need to understand the structure behind it. Because this isn't just about me, this is about who is authorized to speak at all. There are texts, ancient texts, the most of humanity has never actually seen in their original form. They are called the Mahabharata texts, not rewritten, not interpreted, translated. And the translations are not open source. They are not crowdsourced. They're not debated into existence. They are assigned. Only 3 individuals in a given cycle are permitted to translate them, not chosen by institutions, not chosen by governments, but by what is known as the Emerald Order Melchizedek Cloister. You can think of it as a governing body, but not one that operates within human political systems. Ashayana Dean holds what is known as the Speaker 1 contract, and this is not a role that you apply for. It is assigned before birth. It is encoded into the DNA template of the body that you enter. And when the time comes, that encoding activates. Now, I know exactly what this sounds like. It sounds crazy. It sounds hierarchical. It sounds like control. It sounds like something you should question. Good. You should question it. Because the truth is, there are people who falsely claim these positions. There always have been. There always will be. Which is why authentication is part of the system itself. The translations Ashayana provides are not standalone. They are verified through what you would call a multi-layered oversight structure. Councils, collectives, systems of intelligence that operate beyond what most people currently perceive. But this isn't about authority for the sake of power. It's about function. Because these texts, they're not just information, they're fucking instruction manuals. Instruction manuals for what? For how Earth systems actually work. Not metaphorically, structurally, energetically, biologically. Because Earth is not just a planet, it's a system. And that system was in that cycle that required the activation stabilization. Which brings us to why I'm speaking right now. Because we were in a stellar activation cycle from 2003 to 2017. It was a window of time where planetary systems activate, Stargate systems opened, and energy flows increased beyond normal thresholds. And when that happens, Earth cannot stabilize those frequencies on its own. It requires intermediaries, human ones. And this is where it begins to move from interesting idea into something more specific. There are individuals, there are people who are not just living on this planet, but are functioning as part of its infrastructure. Not metaphorically, fucking literally. And those people are known as the flame holders. And before you romanticize that idea, before you turn it into something symbolic, understand this. This is not a title. It's a responsibility. And it comes with consequences. Because if these roles are not fulfilled correctly, Earth's systems do not stabilize. And when systems don't stabilize during an activation cycle, you don't get discomfort. You get catastrophic shifts. Now, I'm going to explain further what flame holders actually are. how they function, and why only 3 of them exist at a time. And more importantly, why some of the original ones didn't make it. Because once you understand that, you're going to start realizing something. This isn't just about teaching, it's a timeline that almost went wrong. And so you already understand that what I'm presenting is not meant to be interpreted as opinion. This is a translation. And that brings us to the question that matters most. Translation of what exactly? The material she works with originates from what are called the CDT plates. These are not tablets you would recognize. They are written in a language you could not sit down and learn. They are not symbolic in the way most ancient texts are. They are frequency encoded data storage systems, which means they don't just contain information, they emit it. And because of that, they cannot be accessed through intellect alone. They require biological compatibility. And this is where people will probably start to misunderstand, because we're used to thinking, oh, if information exists, anyone should be able to read it. And that's not how this works. The CDT plates are designed to interface with specific DNA template configurations, meaning if your body cannot run the frequency, you cannot perceive the content. It's not secrecy in the way humans think of secrecy. It's more like trying to tune into a radio station your receiver isn't built to detect. Now, this is exactly why translation is restricted, because if someone attempts to interpret these systems without the proper interface, what they produce is not translation, it's distortion. And distortion, when it comes to planetary systems, is not harmless. So the structure was put in place long before this lifetime. Only 3 individuals per cycle are assigned the authority to translate, not because they're more special, but because their DNA templates were prepared to handle the interface. Ashiana holds the position of Speaker 1, and that position is not symbolic. It means she serves as the primary point of translation authentication. Every legitimate translation must pass through that verification, not to control information, but to ensure that what is released is structurally accurate. Because these texts are not philosophy, they're mechanics. They describe how Earth's energy systems function, how DNA interacts with those systems, how stellar activations affect planetary stability, and what roles certain humans play within that process. If translated incorrectly, people don't just misunderstand ideas, they interfere with systems. And this is where the responsibility becomes very real. Alongside Speaker 1, there are 2 additional positions, Speaker 2 and Speaker 3. These roles are not optional, they are required, because no single individual is meant to carry the full spectrum of translation responsibility. Each speaker corresponds to a different aspect of what are called the flame currents. And those flame currents are tied to the stabilization of Earth systems, which means translation is not separate from function, it is part of it. The speakers are not just translating information, they are participating in the activation and distribution of it. And this is why the timing matters. The last cycle required these roles to activate earlier than planned. There was an acceleration, a shift in schedule. What was originally meant to unfold gradually was forced into a more immediate timeline because certain agreements failed. And when those agreements failed, the system moved into what is called crisis intervention. That's not dramatic language, that's structural language. It means the normal progression was no longer sufficient to maintain stability. So the translations had to begin sooner. The activations had to happen faster. And the individuals assigned to these roles had to step into them under pressure. Now notice that this entire system is not built on belief. It's built on function and consequence. If the translations are accurate, systems stabilize. If they are not, well, then they don't. And that brings us to this next part, because translation alone is not enough. There must be individuals on Earth capable of actually running the frequencies that these texts describe. Not understanding them, not teaching them, fucking running them. Which brings us to the 3 rules everything else depends on. The flame holders. And to explain exactly what that means, it is not symbolic, it is not metaphorical, it is mechanical. These 3 individuals are said to function as living conduits for planetary energy. And why, according to the system, if those rules fail, Earth does not stabilize during those activation cycles. And once you understand that, you're going to start seeing why so many of these original flame holders did not make it. If you're still following, then you understand that translation is only part of the system. Information alone does not stabilize a planet. There must be something or someone capable of running the energy that information describes. And within this structure, that responsibility falls to what are called flame holders. Now, I want to be very clear, this is not a symbolic title. It is not an archetype. It is a functional role within a planetary system. There are only 3 flame holders active during a stellar activation cycle. Not dozens, not thousands, 3. Each one corresponds to a specific current. The blue flame, the violet flame, and the gold flame. These are not colors in the way you're used to thinking. These are frequency bands. Each flame holder is designed to receive a specific range of frequency, run it through their biological system, and then transmit it into the Earth's planetary field. Yes, through the body. The human body in this system is not just a vessel. It is a translator, a regulator, and a transmitter. Now, here's where this becomes critical, because the frequencies involved in a stellar activation cycle are not naturally compatible with Earth systems at full intensity. If they were allowed to enter the planetary field directly, without mediation, the system would destabilize. According to this framework, that destabilization can lead to pole shift events. So the flame holders serve a very specific function. They draw in the high frequency current and then step down it, meaning they slow it, modulate it, just so it can be safely integrated into the Earth's grid. And they don't do this alone. Once the frequency is processed through their system, it is transmitted into what is called the planetary shield and Templar grid. From there, it is distributed further through groups known as flame keepers. These are the larger collectives, the ones many of you would recognize as indigo children, highly sensitive individuals, people who feel like they're wired differently. Their role is to further step down and distribute the energy into the general life field. So what you have is a layered system. Flame holders are the primary conduits. Flame keepers are the distribution network. Humanity is the receiving field. Now, I want you to really sit with this next part. According to the system, if the flame holders are not functioning correctly, the entire process breaks down. And when it breaks down, Earth's system cannot stabilize the incoming frequencies. This is why the role is not optional. It is not interchangeable. Each flame holder is born with what are called dormant DNA codes. These are not activated immediately. They begin to activate at very specific points in time. And that activation is not gentle. It places intense pressure on the body, on the nervous system, on the psyche. This is why not every appointed individual successfully completes this role. Some experience biological failure. Some experience what is referred to as monadic reversal, which means their system becomes incompatible with the frequencies they were meant to run. And when that happens, they cannot continue. There are limited backups, but even those are not guaranteed because this system was designed with precision, not redundancy. Now, here is something that is often misunderstood. The flame holders are not in control of Earth. They are not governing it. They're maintaining its stability during a specific time cycle. And so, doing so under the direction of the Janus Master Council and the Eliani collectives and the larger Emerald Order structure. This is a coordinated operation, not an individual effort. And it is time sensitive because the current cycle has a window. And within that window, these functions must be completed or the system begins to move toward failure. Now, I know what you're thinking. If this is true, why isn't it obvious? Why don't we see this happening? Because this process does not occur at the level most people are trained to observe. No. Subtle energy systems, biological responses, planetary fields that are not part of the mainstream science, but the effects do ripple outward through the environmental instability, human emotional volatility, and collective pressure that seems to rise without a clear cause. Those are not proofs, but they are reflections within this framework. So we're going to go deeper into what the actual mechanics of this system are. What is the planetary Templar? What the shields are, and how DNA is said to interact with all of it. Because right now, you understand the roles, but you don't yet understand the machine. And once you see the machine, you'll understand why this was never meant to be common knowledge. By now, you understand these roles. You understand there are individuals who translate it and individuals who run frequency, but none of that makes sense unless you understand the structure they're working within. Because Earth is not just a planet, it's a Templar system. And when I say Templar, I'm not referring to anything historical. I'm referring to a living energetic architecture that exists both within the planet and within the human body. The two are not separate. They are mirrored systems. What exists in Earth's field exists in your body, and what exists in your body interfaces with the planet. This is why DNA matters, because DNA in this framework is not just biological. It is instructional and communicative. It holds what are called templates. These templates determine what frequencies your body can process, what information you can perceive, and how you interact with the planetary field. Now, let's zoom out. Earth's Templar system is made up of several key components. 1, planetary shields. Think of these as layers of frequencies surrounding and interpenetrating Earth. They are not physical in the traditional sense. They're structured. Each shield corresponds to a range of frequency, and together, they regulate how energy enters, moves through, and stabilizes within the planet. If the shields are stable, Earth functions normally. If they're damaged or overwhelmed, the systems begin to destabilize. Next one is the Templar grid, and this is the network, the connective system. It links the stargates, the energy pathways, and the planetary shields. And biological systems, including humans, you can think of as like a circulatory system, but instead of blood, it moves frequency. And the third one is stargates. These are entry and exit points. They regulate the flow of energy between Earth, other dimensional systems, and larger universal structures. During a stellar activation cycle, these stargates begin to open more fully, which means more energy enters the system. And that energy must be managed. The fourth one is the human interface. This is where it becomes personal. The human body is not separate from the system. It is part of the Templar network. Your DNA acts kind of like a receiver, a translator, and a transmitter. Most humans operate at a limited bandwidth, not by accident, but by design within the current state of the system. But certain individuals carry expanded templates. Those are the ones who can interface more directly, process higher frequency ranges, and participate in system stabilization. Now, let's connect this back to the flame holders. When stargates open during an activation cycle, they transmit primal currents. These are high intensity frequency streams, too intense to be directly absorbed by Earth's shields. So, they must be received, then stepped down, then distributed. This is the process the flame holders initiate. They pull in the current into their system. Their DNA processes it, slows it, modulates it, and then transmits it into the planetary shield. From there, the Templar grid distributes it outward, and the Flamekeepers further stabilize it and pass it along into the general life field. Now, here's the part most people would miss. The system is not passive, it responds. If the flow is too strong or too fast or improperly regulated, the system doesn't just feel off, it reacts. Through environmental shifts, geological instability, biological stress, and collective emotional intensity, not randomly, structurally, because the Templar system is trying to rebalance itself. Now imagine this, a surge of high frequency current enters the system, but the intermediaries are not functioning properly. The shields can't stabilize it. The grid becomes strained. What happens next? Well, the system looks for ways to release the pressure. And that's where you begin to see rapid shifts, instability, events that seem disconnected but are actually part of a larger response. Within this framework, this is how planetary change occurs. Now, notice something. This entire system requires precision, not belief, not intention alone, function. Because if the components do not operate correctly, the system does not stabilize. And this is why everything we've discussed so far is structured the way that it is. Now, let's talk about something that sits underneath all of this. Not every individual assigned to these roles remains aligned. Some fall. And when they do, it doesn't just remove a piece from the system, it creates distortion within it. So let's talk about the monadic reversal and what this actually means, and what the fallen are described as, and why the system describes an ongoing conflict. Because once you understand that, you'll realize this isn't just a system, it's a system under pressure. And I've explained that the structure, as it was intended to function, is a system of the translation, the frequency management, and the planetary stabilization. But systems do not exist in isolation. No. This one has not operated without interference. Within this framework, there's something you need to understand. Not every being, not every collective, and not every intelligence operating within or around Earth's system is aligned with its intended function. This is where we need to talk about the fall. Now, I'm not using that term in a moral sense. This is not about good or evil in the way it's commonly framed. This is about alignment and function. The system was designed to operate within a specific set of frequency relationships. When those relationships are maintained, the system remains stable. When they are not, distortion occurs. That distortion is what we refer to as the monadic reversal. So let me explain that carefully. Within this framework, each being, each consciousness, each system has a core orientation, a directional alignment of energy and structure. When that alignment is intact, the system can receive, process, and transmit frequency correctly. When it's reversed, the system no longer processes frequency as intended. It begins to distort, redirect, or siphon energy, not out of malice, but out of structural incompatibility. This is what is described as a fallen state, not punished, not judged, but no longer able to operate within the original design. Now, why does this matter? Because the individuals assigned to critical roles, the flame holders, flame keepers, they're not immune to this. In fact, they are the most vulnerable because during activation, their systems are under extreme pressure. Their DNA is opening, their frequency bandwidth is increasing, and during that process, there's a window of instability. If during that window alignment is lost, the system does not partially fall. It fucking fully inverts. And when that happens, that individual cannot complete their function. This is why through the document, you see repeated references to the original appointees who fell, backups being activated, and contracts being reassigned. Because this has not been a smooth process. Multiple individuals originally assigned to hold key positions became unable to fulfill them, some due to biological strain, some due to what is described as external interference. Now, I want to be precise here. We're referring to various collectives that are operating in opposition to the original system design, not metaphorically, as active participants. These are described as the fallen angelic collectives, the draconian groups, and other non-aligned systems. Again, within this framework, this is not mythology. It is presented as infrastructural conflict, a struggle over access to energy systems, control of planetary grids, and influence over human evolution. In the Flameholder system has been one of the primary stabilizing forces preventing full system collapse. This is why they are described as age-old nemesis to these opposing forces. Because as long as the Flameholders and their supporting networks remain functional, the system cannot be fully overtaken. This brings us to something important. When individuals fall, their roles do not simply disappear. They create gaps in the system, and those gaps must be filled. But replacements are not infinite. They are limits. Only a certain number of qualified individuals, only specific DNA templates, and only specific timing windows. So when multiple failures occur, the system begins to strain. Responsibilities are redistributed. Pressure increases on the remaining individuals, and the margin for error shrinks. This is what has led to what is referred to as crisis intervention, a shift from gradual activation to accelerated response, because the system could not rely on its original structure anymore. Now, I want you to take a step back and just look at everything I've said so far. Do you notice a pattern? A system designed for precision, operating under increasing pressure with key components failing and replacements being forced into position. That is not a stable scenario. And this is why the timeline matters, because all of this is happening within a fixed window, and that window is moving. Behind all of this, there is a governing structure that you were unaware of, a council system, a group of individuals who are not just participants but administrators of this entire process, the Signet 12 Inner Council. Who are they? How were they chosen? And why are there only 12 individuals on Earth at this time that are said to hold that level of responsibility? Because, once you understand that, you'll realize something else. The system was never meant to be decentralized. It was designed to be held together by a very small number of people. Up until this point, you've seen the system from the inside out. You understand there are structures, there are roles, and there are functions that must be carried out. But what you haven't seen yet is who is responsible for holding the system together. Because this is not a decentralized network. It's not self-governing. It's administered. And that administration is held by what is called the Signet 12 Inner Council. 12 individuals incarnated on Earth at the same time. Not more, not less, 12. Now, I want to be very clear. This is not a symbolic number. This is not numerology. This is functional limitation, because the level of frequency these individuals are required to run cannot be sustained in large numbers without destabilizing the planetary grid itself. So the whole system restricts. Only 12. Each of these individuals are born with specific DNA template configurations, pre-assigned service contracts, and a role within a broader Emerald Order structure. They are not chosen during this life. They are not trained into position. They are incarnated into it. And when their activation begins, they go through what is called an awakening cycle. Now, this is not a gentle process. It is a period where dormant DNA codes activate, perception expands, and the individual begins to interface with the system directly. And during this time, we're vulnerable because activation is also exposure. If they stabilize through that period, they step into that role. If they do not, they fall. And as we've discussed so far, falling does not just affect the individual, it affects the system. The Signet 12 are not all the same. They exist in levels. The Ekars, the Elder Consummates, and the Consummate Rishis. Ekars are the highest level. Each level corresponds to how much frequency they can run and how much responsibility they can hold, and how directly they interface with the system together. Together, they form the administration body of the Earth's Templar system. They're responsible for coordinating flameholder functions, maintaining system integrity, interfacing with higher councils, and directing crisis response when necessary. They are, in simple terms, the human level command structure. But here's something important. They are not acting independently. They operate in coordination with the Janus Master Council, the Iani collectives, and other non-incarnate governing bodies. So what you have is a layered system, not incarnate oversight, incarnate administration, which is the Signet 12, the functional operators, which are the flame holders, and the distribution networks, which are the flame keepers. Each layer depends on the others. Now, I want to address something directly. This structure can sound hierarchical. It can sound exclusive. It can sound like power. But within this framework, it is not presented that way. It is presented as responsibility under constraint, because these positions are not easy. They are described as high pressure, biologically taxing, and often dangerous to the individual. And most importantly, they're not chosen in this lifetime. The individuals do not just wake up one day and decide, I want to be a part of this. They wake up and realize that we already are. Now, this is something else you need to understand. Not all members of the Signet 12 are publicly known. In fact, many are not. Because part of maintaining system integrity is preventing false claims and infiltration and manipulation of the network. So identities are often withheld and hidden even until the individual wakes up themselves, before they even become aware and accept the role and choose whether to disclose it. It's not for secrecy, for control. It was always for containment, for stability. Now step back for a moment. If you look at everything we're covering, there's a planetary system, a small number of operators, a limited administrative council, and repeated failures and replacements. External interference, and then you start to see the full picture. This is not a relaxed system. It is a system operating under tight constraints, increasing pressure, and that pressure is tied to time, because everything we've discussed is happening within a specific window, a cycle, and that cycle is moving towards a point. That point has an acceleration. There's a timeline, and they call it Plan B because according to that framework, there was always a primary plan, but due to what has already happened, a secondary one had to be activated. And this is where it just stops being just a system. It starts becoming a contingency plan. So here was what was supposed to happen, and here's what happened instead. Up until now, I've described the system as it was designed: a coordinated structure, a timeline, a sequence of activations meant to unfold in a specific order. But that sequence did not proceed exactly as intended. There were disruptions. There were failures. There were points where the system had to adjust in real time. And because of that, the original timeline shifted. The period we're discussing is what's called the stellar activation cycle, a window of time during which stargates progressively open, frequency levels increase, and Earth systems undergoes a structured activation process. This cycle was scheduled to unfold with precision, gradually, in alignment with prepared individuals, functioning flameholder systems, and stable council coordination. But as you now understand, that structure did not remain intact. Key individuals fell. Contracts had to be reassigned. Pressure increased on those who remained, and external interference complicated the further issue. So, what was meant to be a controlled activation began to require intervention. And this is when the system enters what is called a crisis intervention schedule. This is not a dramatic term, it's a functional one. It means the original progression is no longer sufficient to ensure stability. So adjustments are made, timelines accelerate, activations occur earlier, responsibilities shift, and the margin for error becomes smaller. Now, within this framework, there was always a primary objective to guide Earth through this activation cycle and restore its system to what is described as its original template alignment. This includes stabilization of the planetary grids, proper functioning of the Templar grid, and alignment of the human DNA template with the system. This is referred as the Christos realignment mission, and it was scheduled to reach a key point of fulfillment within this cycle. But because of the disruptions we've discussed, the system could not rely entirely on that original trajectory. So a second protocol was initiated, what is referred to as Plan B. Now, I want you to understand this clearly. Plan B is not the preferred outcome. It is the contingency. It exists for one reason, and one reason only. In case Earth's systems cannot be fully stabilized through the original plan. If that occurs, then alternative measures must be taken to preserve life and the system integrity. Within this framework, those measures include evacuation protocols, training of specific groups, preparation for rapid response scenarios, and this is what we refer to as the evacuation training schedule. Now, this is often misunderstood. It is not presented to be a mass panic scenario. No, it is described as a structured response coordinated by the Signet 12, the Flameholders, and the Indigo Flamekeeper groups. The purpose being to assist both themselves and the others in navigating potential instability. Now, this is where the tone shifts again, because within this framework, spiritual development is not just about growth. It is also described as preparation. Preparation for what? The system instability, environmental shifts, and the possibility of rapid change, not as fear, but as readiness. Now, I want to ground something here. The existence of Plan B does not mean failure is inevitable. It means the system is aware of the risk and has prepared for it. Now, as we approach the end of what I want to say, I want you to step back and look at this a structured planetary system, a small number of key operators, there's a governing council, there's repeated disruptions, and a contingency plan. But what I haven't told you yet is what this means for you. For you. Not as a role, not as a title, but as a participant in this system, whether you are aware of it or not. Because according to this framework, you are not outside this. You're within it. And your level of awareness determines how you interact with it. So let's bring this all down from the structural level to the personal level. What the system says about you, your body, your awareness, and your potential role in all of this. Because the question isn't just, is this fucking real? The question is, if it were, where do you stand? If you're still with me and you got this fucking bar, then you've heard a framework that is not casual. It doesn't ask to be believed. It doesn't try to convince. It simply lays out a structure and leaves you inside of it. Now we ask the question that matters. Not about councils, not about flame holders, about you. Because within this framework, you are not outside the system. You're a part of it. Functionally, literally. Your body, your nervous system, your DNA are all described as components within the same network. That doesn't mean you're a flame holder, and it doesn't mean you hold a specific contract. What it does mean is that you exist within the Templar system, And your level of awareness changes how you interact with it. Most people operate what you would call a baseline interaction. They live their lives, they experience their emotions, respond to the environment, all without recognizing that they're part of a larger system. And that's not wrong. It's simply one level of engagement. There are others. Some people begin to notice things, patterns, sensitivity, a sense that their internal state is not entirely separate from what is happening around them. You may feel heightened emotional intensity, physical sensitivity to environments, a pull towards understanding something you can't fully define, and those individuals are often part of what is called the Flamekeeper networks. They're not leaders, not primary conduits. They're part of a distribution center, meaning they interact with the frequencies moving through the system, whether they realize it or not. Now, here's where this becomes important. If you are part of the system, then your state matters, not in a performative way, but in a you must be perfect way, but in a functional way. Because within this, your body processes frequency. Your emotional state affects that processing. Your awareness affects how you regulate it. So the question becomes, are you operating unconsciously within the system or consciously? Now, I'm not asking you to adopt this belief. I'm asking you to observe yourself, because regardless of what you believe, you can still notice how your body responds to stress, how your emotions affect your clarity, how your environment influences your internal state. That's real. What this framework does is place that experience into a larger context. It says those responses are not isolated. They're part of a network. Now, within this system, there is also something else offered. It's not demanded, it's not required, it's offered. And that is contact. Extraterrestrial contact. Not in the way most people imagine, but increased awareness, expanded perception, and a deeper interaction with the system itself through practices, through focus, through what is described as spiritual mastery. Now, again, this is not framed as religion, it's framed as skill development, because within this framework, those skills are not just for growth, they're for stability, both personal and collective. Now, I want to be very clear about something. Nothing in this framework requires fear. Even the idea of Plan B is not presented as panic, it's presented as preparation. Because whether or not you accept the system as literal, you still live in a world that changes, destabilizes, and requires adaptation. So, at the most grounded level, what this comes down to is simple. Know your body, regulate your state, pay attention to your environment, because those things matter. Now step back one final time, look at everything that I've told you so far. You'll see two ways to interpret it. One is literal, a structured system of councils, contracts, planetary mechanics, and human roles. The other is symbolic, a way of understanding the responsibility, awareness, and your place within something larger than yourself. You don't have to choose one immediately. You can sit in the question, because sometimes the value is not in deciding what is true, it's noticing what changes inside of you after you hear it.